You know, he's been my best friend for 20 years. I trust him with my life." My dad's voice carried through the living room as he poured a glass of wine for his old friend, Sam. I froze in the hallway, clutching my phone a little tighter. It wasn't the words that caught my attention. It was the way Sam's laugh filled the space, deep and easy, as if it belonged there. "Don't you think so, Ryan?" my dad called, catching me eavesdropping. I stepped into the room, hoping the heat rising to my face wasn't obvious. Yeah, sure," I stammered, avoiding Sam's gaze. Sam turned toward me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Ryan, right? It's been a long time. Last time I saw you, you were what, 10? 11? 15, I corrected, trying not to notice the way his sharp jawline caught the dim light. "I'm 20 now." "Time flies," Sam said, leaning back into the sofa like he owned the place. It had been years since I'd seen him, but the memory of him was vivid. Back then, he was just another one of my dad's friends, tall, confident, always cracking jokes. Now, he seemed larger than life, his presence magnetic in a way I couldn't explain. "Ryan's been keeping busy," Dad interjected proudly. "College classes, part-time job, the works?" Sam's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, then he nodded. "Good to hear. You're becoming a man, huh?" There was something about the way he said it that made my chest tighten. Later that evening, after dinner, Sam wandered into the kitchen where I was washing dishes. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I glanced over my shoulder. "I've got it, thanks." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching me with an amused expression. "Your dad talks about you a lot, you know. Says you're smart, responsible. Seems like he's proud." I shrugged, unsure how to respond. Compliments from him felt different, like they carried more weight. "I guess," I mumbled. Sam chuckled. "You don't take praise well, do you?" I turned off the faucet and dried my hands, feeling exposed under his gaze. "Not really. You should work on that," he said, his tone almost teasing. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged, like the hum of an approaching storm. I broke the stare, muttering something about needing to finish my homework, and hurried out of the room. The guest room was next to mine, and that night, I lay awake, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards as Sam moved around. It wasn't just his presence in the house that unsettled me, it was the way he made me feel seen in a way no one else did. There was something disarming about his easy confidence, the way he seemed to take up space without trying. The next morning, I found him on the back porch, sipping coffee. "Morning, Ryan," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Morning," I replied, hesitating before stepping outside. The sun was barely up, casting the yard in soft, golden light. He gestured to the chair next to him. "Join me?" I sat down, the silence between us surprisingly comfortable. "You know," he began, "when I was your age, I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. Spent years just trying to figure it out." I glanced at him, unsure why he was telling me this. "What changed?" "Someone believed in me," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. By the time my dad left for work that afternoon, Sam and I had already shared several casual conversations. Each one felt like peeling back a layer, revealing someone who was far more complex than I'd imagined. "Ryan, can you show Sam where the tools are in the garage?" my dad asked before heading out the door. "Sure," I replied, trying to ignore the way Sam's eyes flicked toward me as he stood up. The garage was cramped and cluttered, but it gave us a moment of privacy. As I rummaged through a toolbox, Sam leaned against the workbench, his arms crossed. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said, breaking the silence. I glanced at him. "Not when I don't have anything to say." He smiled. "I like that. You're not afraid of silence." Something about his tone made my pulse quicken. There was a weight to his words, a quiet intensity that I couldn't ignore. For a moment, the world outside the garage seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us and the unspoken tension hanging between us. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Ryan. Not everyone your age does. Sam's words echoed in my mind as we sat in the dim living room. My dad had left hours ago for an emergency at work, and the house felt unusually still. I shifted in my seat, glancing at Sam. He was sprawled on the couch, legs stretched out, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I don't know about that, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. You don't give yourself enough credit, he said, his eyes meeting mine. You've got this quiet strength about you. My chest tightened, the praise feeling both flattering and dangerous. Thanks, I muttered, my gaze dropping to the carpet. He leaned forward, setting his glass on the coffee table. You ever get tired of living in someone else's shadow? I blinked, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? You're always so careful around your dad, so polite. Do you ever let loose, just do what you want? I hesitated, unsure how to answer. I guess I don't think about it much. Sam studied me for a moment, a small smile playing on his lips. Maybe you should. The conversation stayed with me as the night dragged on. After dinner, Sam suggested we watch a movie, something old and slow-moving, but the film quickly became background noise. Mind if I sit here? He asked, gesturing to the other end of the couch where I was curled up. Sure, I said, scooting over slightly. He settled beside me, his shoulder close enough to brush mine if either of us moved. The proximity felt deliberate, like he was testing the waters. As the movie played, I became hyper-aware of every small shift he made. The way his arm rested on the back of the couch, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. You look tense, he said suddenly, his voice low. I laughed nervously. I'm fine. He turned to me, his expression soft but intent. You don't have to be fine all the time, you know. His words hit deeper than they should have. I opened my mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Come here, he said gently, patting the space beside him. I hesitated for a moment before sliding closer. His arm draped over the back of the couch, not quite touching me, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. It's okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can relax. The air between us grew heavier, the tension palpable. My heart raced as I tried to focus on the screen, but Sam's presence was impossible to ignore. Then, without warning, he reached over and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was light, almost fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me. Sorry, he said with a small smile. Couldn't help myself. I looked at him, searching his face for some sign of what he was thinking. His gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. Sam, I began, my voice shaky. He leaned closer, his hand brushing against mine. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. Time seemed to slow as his face inched closer to mine. I knew I should pull away, say something, do anything to stop what was happening, but I couldn't move. When his lips finally met mine, it was like the world tilted on its axis. The kiss was soft at first, testing, but quickly grew more insistent. Every logical thought in my mind screamed at me to stop, to think about the consequences, but my body betrayed me, leaning into him instead of away. The kiss broke as quickly as it started, leaving both of us breathless. I shouldn't have done that, Sam said, his voice thick with regret. I shook my head, struggling to find the right words. No, it's... He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. It's okay. We'll figure this out. But his words did little to ease the knot of guilt forming in my stomach. As we sat there in silence, the weight of what had just happened settled between us, heavy and unyielding. I should go to bed, I said finally, my voice barely audible. Sam nodded, his expression unreadable. Good night, Ryan. I stood and walked to my room, my mind racing. As I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. The night wasn't over, but something irreversible had just begun. The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom window, but it did little to ease the weight pressing on my chest. I hadn't slept at all. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Ryan?" Sam's voice was tentative, almost cautious. I sat up, heart racing. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Sam stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him. He looked different, less composed, his usual confidence dimmed by something that looked like guilt. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I nodded, bracing myself. "About last night?" "Yeah." He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze flicking to the floor. "I crossed a line, Ryan. And I'm sorry." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "It wasn't just you. I didn't stop it." He sat on the edge of the bed, careful to keep some distance between us. "I should have known better. You're young, you've got your whole life ahead of you, and I complicated things." The sincerity in his voice was almost painful. "It wasn't just some mistake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sam looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "No, it wasn't. But that doesn't make it right." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "So, what happens now?" The rest of the day passed in a haze. My dad returned home, oblivious to the tension between Sam and me. Dinner was filled with the usual small talk, but every glance Sam and I exchanged felt like a secret threatening to spill. After the meal, my dad stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving us alone in the living room. Sam broke the silence. "Ryan, listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Whatever happened between us, you deserve more than this. More than sneaking around, more than living with the weight of a secret like this." I stared at him, struggling to process his words. "So, you're saying we just forget it ever happened?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. I'm saying we learn from it. You're an amazing person, Ryan, but this isn't the right way to start something real." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Sam had said. He was right, what we'd done wasn't fair to my dad or to ourselves. But it wasn't just guilt I felt. There was a spark, something real beneath the surface, and I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, Sam was packing his bag when I found him in the guest room. "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Your dad doesn't need me hanging around forever. I think it's better this way." I took a step closer. "Sam, I don't want this to be the end." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Ryan, I care about you. But if this is going to be anything, it has to happen the right way, at the right time." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I nodded. "You promise?" A small smile broke through his serious expression. "I promise." Over the next few weeks, life returned to something resembling normal. Sam left, but he kept his promise, sending the occasional text to check in. Each message was a reminder that he hadn't forgotten me, and that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something real in the future. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I got a message from Sam. "Coffee sometime? I'd like to talk." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, a smile tugging at my lips. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like we were moving towards something honest, something that could last. Sometimes, the right thing doesn't happen in the wrong moment. But when the moment comes, you'll know. And I was ready.